Hey, this is Joe, Graybench Electronics. Welcome back to the pedal teardown series where I take apart new and interesting pedals and show you what's going on inside. Today we have the Spiral Electric Effects White Spiral Boost. Okay, we got the White Spiral Boost from Spiral Electric Effects. So this is a pedal company created by Tom Cram, who was the product manager for Digitech and DoD. They are no longer in that position, so they started a pedal company called White Spiral, or what is it called? Spiral Electric Effects. And the pedal here is White Spiral Boost, which is like a boost slash light overdrive pedal. It is JFET based. It has an internal charge pump, so it's running 18 volts internally. Right now, before we go too much into the pedal itself, I wanted to have a look at the packaging. I don't usually look at packaging because, number one, I buy used pedals and they often don't come with the packaging, you just get the pedal. But also because generally the packaging is just a cardboard box, not particularly interesting. In this case, it's clear that the designers had an appreciation for the whole package, the product. And as someone who briefly went to school for product design, I can appreciate or commiserate with that inclination. So this is the packaging for at least this pedal, presumably the whole Spiral Electric Effects line. So it's about 1/8 inch ply that is laser cut with an internal divider here, and it is glued together. You can see a little bit of glue remnants on the side. The wood does have some sort of finish, but it's not a stain, I wouldn't say. It's just, you can feel that it's been finished and sanded a little bit, and then some sort of finish applied to it. So it's just a box with no lid. They have a separate acrylic lid here with the Spiral Electric logo there. Unfortunately, this little has maybe a design flaw, you could say, in that these little ears that create the hinge for the top of the box, they easily break off, as this one has already in the corner there. Inside the box, we have some goodies. So there's a felt, or sort of that like thin foam liner. It's a relatively dense foam, just to protect the pedal from being marred by the wood box. There is a sticker in here. It has sort of a texture. It's the Spiral Electric logo. There is a cutout from what feels like a magazine, just sitting in there for, you know, ambiance, I guess. There is an instruction manual, sort of like a quick start guide. It does have a link to a more detailed manual on their website. Also inside the package is a little bundle here. So we've got a pin, which is the Spiral Electric logo again as a pin. But there's also this little package with wood chips that apparently are soaked in whiskey. Oop. And apparently you can take this and put it in your grill to impart a certain flavor or aroma on your cooked meats, I guess. And it also makes the box smell like wood and whiskey, which maybe my smeller is just not working well today, but I don't really smell anything just besides plywood. But that is there for a little piece, so that's one of the pieces of goodies inside the box. You also get a little package here of what they call knob locks, and it looks like just a couple pieces of the same foam material that you're meant to put underneath the knob, and it gives some pressure for it pushes against the enclosure and the knob to make it harder to turn the knob accidentally. We saw something similar incorporated into a different way to do it, but the function was the same on the Tour Bender from Union Tube and Transistor. They put the little rubber O-rings on the actual shaft, and it was just to create pressure between the knob and the enclosure to make it harder to turn the knob so it doesn't get bumped out of position. So they're doing it here with these foam spacer pieces, or sort of like a foam washer. Interestingly, there's only 2 included in the package here, but there's 3 knobs. So I did buy this used, and maybe one disappeared in the meantime. Not sure about that. So that is the packaging. We got the Spiral Electric Effects website there, laser cut into the wood. Otherwise, yeah, neat little packaging. Definitely, you know, there's some cost that goes into doing this, so it's clear that they had a vision for what they wanted, and they made it happen. Where other companies would just seek to maximize the profits they get by using a cardboard box, they went the extra mile, so there you go. All right, back to the pedal here. We have sort of an upside down design where the majority of the controls are attached to the lid of the enclosure, and the sort of components inside are sitting in the cavity of what we would normally consider the top of the enclosure, but in this case the top is the lid and the bottom is sort of the cavity holding all the components inside. The downside to this design is that your lid is going to be tethered to your input jacks and DC jack, assuming that they're on the sides of the pedal. Of course, when you take it off, we're going to see that the lid will not be free. You're going to have to release it somehow. As far as controls, we have a girth control. That is a 6-way switch. There is a grit control, which is a potentiometer, and an output control. Girth is it says in their information, it's a capacitor switch, so it's probably switching the input cap to the pedal. There is a switch here that's labeled A and the omega symbol, and they call it alpha and omega. And apparently it moves the location in the circuit where this capacitor switch is. The grit is the gain control, so that's adjusting the gain and clipping from one of the JFET stages, and then the output is the output volume from the pedal. Latching, triple pole double throw foot switch most likely. The Spiral Effects logo, LED is a chrome bezel. The LED is actually really deeply inset into the bezel here, and I wonder if that's a sign that part of the PCB is actually on the inside of the enclosure, or they could just want it to sit further inside so it reflects more on the sort of inner barrel of the bezel. On the top of the pedal here, we have this nice cast placard. It's got the Spiral Electric Effects brand name and logo, input and output jacks, 9-volt DC jack, handmade in the USA. And then curiously, after they've made all this effort into the packaging and the aesthetics and the build, they have a spot here where they just write the serial number in Sharpie, which seems kind of crazy to me that they went to all this trouble and then they just write the serial number in Sharpie. And as you can see here, immediately the problem with Sharpie shows up, which is like the least permanent marker, and over more than half of this serial number is just gone. I think what would be nice personally here is if they stamped it like a punch set and just punched in the serial number. That would obviously take more time and would be more difficult, but from what I'm looking at here, time and effort is not something they're in particularly short supply of, and especially when you have a situation like this where the serial number is actually disappearing. Like I can't even read that. I don't think. I don't know. I can't read it. I don't even know what serial number this pedal is. So that feels like a miss to me. But yeah, otherwise the pedal's got a cool, simple, straightforward, utility-minded aesthetic that I like. And I think we've looked at everything on the outside. The actual enclosure here, it's obviously a 1590 BB size enclosure. The top side, the lid where all the controls are, it does have some sort of metal work done to it. It looks to me like it's like an angle grinder with a flap disc, and they've kind of just run that back and forth over the top of the lid. That's what it looks like to me. Just something to break that aesthetic of just the regular casted aluminum kind of speckled, dusty look of the just stock plain enclosures. The website says it's hand brushed, but I don't know if they're counting like hand holding an angle grinder or if it's actually done by hand, so not sure about that. But anyway, I guess that's it for the exterior of the pedal. Let's go ahead and crack it open. All right, so here is the PCB for the white spiral boost pedal from Spiral Electric Effects. So just going over what I'm seeing first, we have open frame 1/4-inch jacks for input and output. These don't look like, they're obviously modeled after the Switchcraft number 11, but I don't recognize the specific substrate that they're using. It doesn't look like the Rans or the actual Switchcraft ones. They seem like fine quality, so don't have any issues there. Alpha PCB mount potentiometer, 16 millimeter. The values here, so this is the volume pot here, and that is a reverse log 10K, and the gain pot or grit pot is a reverse log 5K. Interestingly, the PCBs are marked audio 10K for output or volume, and 25K with no taper marking for the grit control, so that's obviously gone through some revision. The voltage regulator or charge pump is a microchip technology TC1044S, and we have some of the regular associated components, a couple of rectifier diodes, as well as capacitors, electrolytic capacitors. Some of these will be part of the charge pump circuit, and some of these will just be filtering for the power supply input. In here, it looks like we have a mix of a couple different manufacturers of metal film 1/4 watt resistors. We also have a little diode in there. I can't really see the specific marking for that diode, but it looks like one of the BAT41 or 42, one of those series silicon diodes. There's also an empty spot for a diode here, so there might be like an asymmetric versus symmetric design that was tested, and they've decided to go with the single diode version here. And you can see there the JFETs are the Fairchild J310. So that is a higher, or I guess you could say lower, pinch-off voltage, negative voltage, higher idle current JFET transistor, or I should say max current or saturation current JFET, than something that you would see like the usual suspect, like a J201, which makes sense for this being a boost pedal. You're not really looking for that clipping straight from the JFET stage itself. Any clipping from this pedal is most likely going to be that diode on the PCB itself. So in that case, a lot of JFETs would probably work in this circuit. J310 is probably just what the builder had on hand. And then of course we have our array of capacitors, as we would expect to see with that capacitor switch. So going down the values here for these capacitors, we have a 1 microfarad cap. This one's a little hard to read. I believe it's a 680 nanofarad cap, a 470 nanofarad cap, a 220 nanofarad, a 47 nanofarad, a 33 nanofarad. And then on the side here, the board is marked 560 picofarad, which is a pretty big jump down from the 33 nano. And I'm thinking, well, it's actually not. It's actually more than that, because if you can see here, we have two capacitors paralleled with each other, where this, I'm guessing one of these two is actually put into the board, actually through hole mounted to the board, and this other capacitor is tacked on. It looks like the lower one here, which is interesting. You would think if you want one of these capacitors actually through holes to the board, you'd want the slightly heavier one, but it probably doesn't matter for such a small component. These are silver mica high voltage capacitors. Totally unnecessary for this pedal, obviously, but when you want those low values and you want high precision, the silver micas do tend to be the choice. They are soldered here in parallel. So for capacitors, when you put them in parallel, you add their capacitances together. So this top one here is a 560 picofarad, and the lower one is a 430 picofarad. So that is going to be approximately 1.1 nanofarad. As far as the switches, so the capacitor network switch is a alpha rotary switch. And the lower alpha or omega switch here is a 4-pole double throw switch. So similar to the 3-pole double throw foot switches, except there's an extra pole. That would make sense. They're just taking this whole switch and moving it to a different part of the circuit. So you're going to need some switching capability for that. And that is what that little toggle switch is there. It's switching 4 poles at a time between 2 different options. So 4-pole double throw. The wire here is solid core wire. It's the pushback style, so you don't strip it per se. You just kind of cut it and then push back on the wire to expose some of the inner conductor. Potentiometers have the pot covers on them, which seem unnecessary in this case. There's usually only use these pot covers if the potentiometer is covered by a PCB, so that the back of the potentiometer doesn't short out to the connections on the board. The foot switch here, as far as I can see, it's unmarked in terms of manufacturer. The actuation pressure, I would say, is not quite as bad as like the generic blue ones, but it's not as nice as the Gorva light green switches. And it looks like there's maybe I could say room for improvement. There's a breakout board for the foot switch, which makes sense and makes it easy just to access the different connections on the switch just with a row here. But if you can see there, they attached header pins to connect the PCB to the main board, which is fine. But the breakout board for the foot switch doesn't extend far enough, and so they sort of had to bend the header pins at a slight angle to get over to the foot switch, so the foot switch clears the PCB. So the correct thing would be to make this PCB a little bit longer so that the pins don't have to reach as far to the side. They would just drop straight on. So I would imagine that's something that they would change in a future build or future order. It's a simple thing to do. Also worth mentioning that they went with a 2mm thickness for the PCB here, which I think is a great idea because you have these two big switches mounted to it, so that little bit of extra rigidity I think is a great idea. All right, so that is the PCB assembly for the Spiral Electric Effects white spiral boost pedal. Let's go ahead and put it back together. I feel a little bit awkward doing this because I don't want to mess with someone's like aesthetic choices, especially when it's clear that that aesthetic is important to the product. But man, if there was ever a time to use a external nut Kobicon DC jack, this is the time. When you have one of these pedals with the guts mounted to the lid, it is super awkward trying to get in here and solder the internal nut DC jack on there, because you have to get it in there or you have to push the wires through and try. You saw I tried to do it like that. It's just super awkward. Why not just go with one of the external nut Kobicon DC jacks? Then you don't have to deal with that. You can just solder this on separately and then take the whole thing and push it through just like the 1/4 inch jack. So I'm making an executive decision. Sorry, Tom, I don't mean to, mess with your design, but I feel like this is the right way to go. So we're gonna do this. Forget messing around with this thing. All right, there's a teardown of the white spiral boost from Spiral Electric Effects. If you enjoyed the teardown, I'd appreciate you hitting the like button and subscribing, and hit the notification bell if you want to know when I make a new video. If you have any questions or recommendations for a pedal you want to see on a future teardown episode, let me know in the comments. I'm Joe from Graybench Electronics. Thanks for watching.